Welcome to the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast for CHSM with Charlie Roumeliotis. I am Pat Boyle. We are brought to you by Toyota. Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. Find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. Charlie, let's go to San Jose. That was where the Blackhawks last played a disappointing 3-2 final to the Sharks, who somehow have managed to stack 3 wins together. But it's the Hawks' inability to stack wins where I want to begin. Only 3 times last year did they win back-to-back games, which is, holy shnikes on that. And then they get an opportunity to build upon a solid win against Colorado, against a San Jose team that is, not world beaters by any stretch. And they had another one of those second periods where the energy level, their game wasn't where it was for most of the first and all of the third.
Yeah, it's weird that San Jose did something that Chicago didn't do all of last season, and that's win 3 games in a row. It's like, and this San Jose team feels worse than last year's Blackhawks team. And San Jose was without Macklin Celebrini too. So it's not like the Sharks were full strength. They were, so it was a disappointing disappointing loss by the Blackhawks. And it's weird because all of these losses feel like they're different scripts. Like it's either a bad first half of the game, a tough second half, or it's a strong first half of the game, but they didn't close the door in the third period. And then in the San Jose game, it was solid first period, really strong third period, but it was the second period where they had a lapse. So it was like good, bad, good, when you break it down by period. So, disappointing because, man, it was there for the Blackhawks it was on a silver platter. You come off a big win in Colorado, then you go on the California swing in San Jose, very winnable game. And then you go into the weekend with Anaheim on the docket, the second of a back-to-back. And Anaheim is not a great hockey team either. So they easily could have finished this road trip with like 3 or 4 wins at least, going back home with some confidence. And now it's almost like you get knocked down after the Colorado win, and it almost makes the Colorado win worthless if you can't capitalize on it with the win in San Jose.
And the post-game comments sound like the same ones we've heard, over and over. We liked our game here, but here's where we didn't like it. And that's where they got 2 goals, and that's where they took, you could see the frustration on Ryan Donato's face, who, by the way, has his team-leading 6th goal. And, I didn't think it was a tremendous start for the Blackhawks last night. I thought they got off to a little bit of a slow start in that first period. Will Smith got the party started with a goal about 6 minutes in, but it was the next shift. We talk about important shifts in games, shifts to start periods, to close periods, and shifts after goals are scored. 37 seconds after Smith scores his first NHL goal, the third line answers, and lo and behold, it was Ryan Donato once again.
Yeah, and then the quick strike immediately after that to build on that was impressive, where it was 50 seconds later, the Blackhawks made it 2-1, which was impressive to me because last year it felt like it was always the opposite. The Hawks scoring a goal, then the opponent answering quickly after the shift, and then them capitalizing on it. And so it was nice to see the Blackhawks, even in the Colorado game, when Colorado, I think the Hawks went up 1-0. Colorado tied it to make it 1-1. And then Ryan Donato scored immediately after to make it 2-1. So it was like, it was back-to-back performances where the Blackhawks were quick striking and preventing the other team from kind of building on that momentum.
That's the line. That's the line he puts out there when he needs a tone setter, whether it's to start a period, whether it's to stop momentum after the opposition scores. He has faith in that Dickinson, Mikheyev, and now Donato line, and they've been they've been really, really strong and by far the most consistent line on this team.
Yeah, no question. And Troy had brought it up on the broadcast immediately too. The Blackhawks win the opening faceoff of the game, and then 7 seconds into this, they ice the puck, and it's like a defensive zone draw, and it's almost like it kind of set the tone for how the next 5 or 6 minutes would go for San Jose. Because, like you mentioned, the first 5 or 6 minutes were not the Blackhawks' strong suit. I think they were being outshot 4-0, and then San Jose made it 1-0. But after San Jose's goal, about 6 or 7 minutes in, the Hawks tilted the ice in their favor, and so from that perspective, it was encouraging to see. But it was weird how the Hawks win a clean draw. It was Connor Bedard, of all people, won the draw, didn't win a single faceoff in the last game in Colorado, wins the draw, and then 7 seconds in, the Hawks ice the puck. And so then it's like, oh, now you're looking at a defensive zone faceoff, and who knows what could come from that. But yeah, so it was disappointing. I was thinking about this, Pat. Like, I know that kind of the narrative now is like Hawks are dead last in the NHL. They got the same record as, I think, the Sharks now, 3 wins, whatever. It's like, this team to me still feels like they're better than last year. I think we can agree they are better than last year. But the way they're losing is different than last year. It's tight games. It's just these little lapses in the game. Last year, it felt like we left a game or left a win, even a win. It was like, man, Peter Mrazek had 43 saves in the win. Like, it didn't even feel like a good win. Or in the losses, it was, man, where would they have been without Peter Mrazek? This game probably would have been 5-1 if it were not for Pete. This year, it feels like they're in games. They're just either have the bad starts or they can't close. And Scott Powers had wrote it in his article in The Athletic after the game. In 10 of the 11 games for the Blackhawks this season, they've either been leading, tied, or trailing just by 1 goal in the third period. So it's not like an alarming trend where the Hawks are like, oh boy, they just got the doors beat off of them. It's they're there. They just can't get over that hump of putting together the whole full 60 minutes.
And even in that third period when they're down a goal and they outshoot San Jose 13-5, I didn't feel like there were any like 10 Beller saves that had to be made. Like the ice was definitely tilted in their favor. And the stat you mentioned, I mean, again, 11 games, 10 of those you've had the lead, tied, or down by a goal. That tells you really all you need to know. You're in every game. I mean, that tells you right there, that stat, that you're in every game. Now, there's been a couple of times where they've given up a couple goals in that finals frame and end up losing by multiple goals. But it's a better team than last year. If you don't watch the games and you just look at the final score on your phone, you say, like, where's the growth? If you watch the games, you see there's a better talent level. There is more structure to their game. I thought they got away from it in the second. And the margin for error remains very slim with this team. That really is what it comes down to me is, and they're, when they do pick up wins, you brought up the stat about scoring off the rush. Do they generate offense, cycling and things? We saw last night, like the Donato goal. It starts with a great pinch by Murphy along the wall, and then Mikheyev just throws the puck in front. It goes off a shark to Donato, and he scores. It was nothing spectacular about that play, just smart recognition by Murph along the wall, and Mikheyev putting it in a dangerous area. It was a fortunate bounce, and Donato sniped it. So, there can be this more lunch pail approach by some of the other lines, and we'll get into the Kurashev-Bedard and Teravainen line and whether or not that should remain together in just a bit. But I liked what I saw on that play by Murph. The other thing you talked about on the Bertuzzi goal, and again, it's another a goal off of a one draw, and Foligno wins the draw cleanly. Hall gets it back to Murphy. on a couple of plays last night, I think you saw there's been a concerted effort by the D for the quick release from the point. And you saw that the puck goes back to Murph. He does like a quarter clapper, but he doesn't allow a defender to get in the lane. And earlier in the game, Wyatt Kaiser on the opposite side, left side, a quick quarter clapper release with Bertuzzi in front, and it ends up in a save, but it was the right idea. So like to see more of that. Like, it seems like sometimes they're looking for the perfect shot. Sometimes they're passing up opportunities in good areas where they have open ice to let one go. But I'd like to see the D get that puck towards the net quicker, not always so concerned about how hard the shot is or your wind up. I'd rather get it there quickly before defenders, because last night I think San Jose ended up with like 27 blocked shots.
Right. It's the same thing of what Luke Richardson was telling us, the broadcasters, a few weeks ago. On the context of the conversation was talking about the power play and getting shots off the point, but it can translate into 5-on-5, where defensemen can sometimes get scared shooting the puck from the point, because if it's a blocked shot, it can lead to a rush the other way on the power play specifically, because there's only one defenseman out there. And that's why defensemen can maybe be a little bit hesitant, where, if you get that quick shot off and you're 100% confident that there's going to be a lane to get this puck towards the net, defensemen will do it. But if there's any hesitation of this shot might get blocked and it could go the other way, that little sense of like there's no confidence or there's little confidence that it's going to get through, they'll find a different way to either pass it or try to get the shot off wide so somebody can redirect it or whatever. So it was nice to see Murphy it didn't matter, like you said, how hard the shot was, just getting it towards the net. And it was funny too, because you can probably even look at the Colorado game too. This is a poor example, but they win the faceoff. Craig Smith shoots it, and it literally just grazes off Lucas Reichel and goes in. It's like it was just a shot towards the net. Reichel was just standing near or in front of the goaltender, and it goes in. Like, even those little things, like, it doesn't have to be so pretty. And just kind of reflecting on some of the games, like, okay, like, we were mentioning how the Hawks in 10 of the 11 games, they've been leading, tied, or within one in the third period. And it's like, I think about the Dallas game from Saturday. I mean, that there's a clip on social media of Seth Jones shooting the puck on a 6-on-5 opportunity. I mean, that puck is going directly into the net, and Foligno redirects it. If the Hawks tie that game and make it 3-3, they force overtime. They get at least a point. I think of the Winnipeg game. If they were 64 seconds away from a shutout victory and then they lose in overtime. I think of the Nashville at the United Center. Hawks are up 2-0. If Teravainen's skate is an inch on the blue line, the Hawks go up 3-0, and that goal doesn't get overturned by offside. And maybe that's the momentum they needed to feel Nashville was out of the game. Just these little things. And I'm not trying to make excuses, because I think if you want to be a great team, you kind of have to power through those.
Overcome that. Exactly. Because it happens in every game we watch. Yeah. Like,
exactly.
You could look last night, the game-winning goal. It's midway through the second period. The Sharks are on the power play. Murphy gets the puck below the goal line. He's walking his way up the boards, and he tries to exit the zone. It goes off the referee, caroms perfectly to Will Smith. He scores his second.
Right.
Again, that happens in a lot of games. There's bad bounces. How about, and I'll ask you this question. Did you think on the Wenberg goal that, sometimes that play is blown dead? I thought that Mrazek had made the save, but he made like one extra move, like he was kind of adjusting to look for it. And I think that allowed the referees to keep the play alive. There's certain angles where you can clearly see the puck, because Wenberg went right for it, poked it, and it was like a clean. It wasn't like he was fire poking it for 5 days and it finally went in. I mean, it was a clean strike for him, but I have seen where that play is blown dead.
Yeah. And it was a weird play too, because the official is behind the net.
Yeah.
So typically if you can see the puck trickle behind him and like their pads are like a V, you can see the puck behind it, but it looked like the puck was in front. So I don't know if the official behind the net could have seen the puck loose. So it's almost like the officials gave it an extra second or two just to make sure. And to also be fair, Mrazek should have just swallowed that puck. Like I think he'd be the first to tell you. And that's another reason why the loss is like, it is what it is. It's just like Mrazek didn't have his A game, and no. that's a rare off night for him, and he'd be the first to say it. But
that's probably because of usage too, right? 5 straight starts, 9 of 11. This Soderblom sickness sounds like it really rocked him when I listened to what Luke had to say before the game. It doesn't sound like your garden variety flu or something, but
that Friday when the Hawks played Nashville, the Hawks had a morning skate, and they later in the day called up Comesso because Soderblom was sick. And I remember walking inside the locker room at Friday, the morning skate on Friday, and I look over at Soderblom, and he's like this. He's got his hands like he's kind of looking down, so he didn't look like he was feeling well. So I'm not surprised. I also think the win over Colorado was probably like Luke was like, well, we got to go back to Mrazek because we're not going to change our goalie. You know, obviously it's San Jose is an easy opponent to get Soderblom back in, but I think they were like, well, we got to run this back with Mrazek, even if we're kind of wearing him a little bit.
I mean, that's kind of the mantra, right? They want to make a dent in the standings this year. They're going to do everything they can to start Mrazek as much as possible without risk, and obviously, so this weekend, I would assume Soderblom starts Saturday in LA and Mrazek goes Sunday in Anaheim, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I agree. And this is also kind of thinking about Laurent Brossoit. Like, he needs to get back because when you're overworking, you don't want to overwork Mrazek this early in the season. And Brossoit is like, he's a really dependable backup goaltender. And it's just weird that we're now in the 9th week of an injury that was supposed to be 5 to 7 weeks. I want to say, I know his wife was expecting around this time, so that might have played a role. But Ryan Donato also was playing in preseason games, and his wife was like due the next day or something. So maybe they're just being overly cautious with this. But yeah, it's the Hawks want to get Brossoit back too because they don't want to feel. But at the same time, thinking about Mrazek and how he didn't have his A game against San Jose, like that's going to happen in the NHL. Like if you're the Blackhawks, you also have to find ways to figure out how to grind through when maybe your goaltender isn't. I think last year when Soderblom was in that was way hard to overcome because he feels like he just couldn't make the easy save too. But when Mrazek has a little bit of an off night, I mean, there's still San Jose only scored 3 goals. It wasn't like they peppered it with 40 shots or whatever. So, the Hawks also have to, part of the maturity process is trying to find a way of overcoming your goaltender even when he's not at his best.
Can't believe it's 19 minutes into the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast, brought to you by Toyota. And we're just going to discuss the Bedard line situation. So Kurashev was moved up there a couple games ago. We talked about the faceoff struggles in Colorado. Connor was 0 for 8. Kurashev was 0 for 2. So they were 0 for 10 collectively. And I mean, in that game, I think Bedard only had 17 shifts. So if 10 of his shifts, he's losing the puck, that's a lot of time that he's trying to get the puck back or doesn't have the puck on his stick. So my question to you is, we all know Kurashev and Tabo and Connor kind of see the game similarly, but there also needs to be the north-south element, that the puck retriever, the guy who can clean up scraps in the house. could also be a vital ingredient to a line. So how long does Luke stay with the Kurashev-Bedard-Tavo line? And when does he possibly, maybe it's time for Tyler Bertuzzi, who we thought all along was going to get some run with Bedard. Maybe it's time for Bertuzzi, Bedard, and if you want to go Tavo, I have no problem with that. If you want to go Kurashev, I could live with that as well.
I know the Blackhawks practice around 2:00 today, so we're recording this beforehand. So we're just, for context, if you're listening to this after practice, I said on the post-game show I would run back Kurashev-Bedard-Teravainen for one more game, and just to see, because the first game was against Dallas, and it was the second of a back-to-back. Was it against Dallas or Nashville? I think it was Dallas.
Yeah.
And
Nashville so at home and at Dallas on Saturday.
Right. So I think for me, it's all three of them think the game the same way, obviously, but there is, like you mentioned, they're all kind of creators and scorers, so they don't have anyone to puck retrieve. Here's what I will say, and I mentioned this example on the post-game show, is that line, you kind of have to live with what their identity is at the three of them and not make one of them do something different than they're accustomed to. And the example I used was, it stylistically, this is a bad comparison, but just from a level of playing the strengths, is DeBrincat, Strome, and Kane. When the three of them were together, it was high risk, it was high reward. Like, they were going to generate a lot, but they were probably going to give up a lot, and you weren't going to see many greasy goals. You were going to see a lot of them just playing off of each other, because offensively they all think the game at a high level. So, I mean, there was at one point, I think it was 6 or 7 minutes. It was like, I think it might have been like 6 or 7 minutes into the game, where I looked at the numbers of that line, and they were being like, shot attempts were 6-0 San Jose when Kurashev, Bedard, and Teravainen were on the ice. And I was like, oof, this is trending in a bad direction. And since then, they actually finished, shot attempts were 18-4 in favor of the Blackhawks when they were on the ice. And they generated 10 chances. The problem is, I can't really think of many high quality chances, And so it kind of gets to what we were saying. There weren't really many. I mean, they had that one really long sustained offensive zone shifts that was like a minute. So that they were really cycling and playing off of each other. But there weren't those, oh man, they came so close on several shifts, like, of breaking through. Granted, Bedard had 2 of those shots that went off the knob of the goaltender's stick. So maybe it's a different conversation if one of those go in. But I would run it back, maybe even through the weekend. And then when they get back home to Chicago, you can be like, okay, Bertuzzi's starting to heat up. Maybe the Teravainen and Bedard combo has worn off a little bit. Do we give Bertuzzi a look with Bedard, since they played together all of camp, but we went away from it the day before the season opener? So I think, we'll see what they run in practice, but I would run it back at least one more game. And if it doesn't go well after that game and you want to change it up going into Anaheim, fine by me. But I wouldn't panic just yet, because it feels like Hall and Bertuzzi are starting to click the last couple of games as well. So I don't know. It's a weird situation, because you don't want to keep running. You don't want to keep running back the same lines without doing anything different. But it's also like, is the dam about to burst? Like, if they continue to generate those chances, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I think it depends on the opponent too. I think the approach that Kurashev, Bedard, and Tavo take against big D and big forwards versus a team that is smaller and gives them more time and space, you may have to almost alter it going on the opposition you're going up against. Big, like, it didn't, I guess, really surprise me against Colorado, a bigger team, that line struggled. I thought they would have a lot more success against San Jose. And, the numbers say they had more success. I think Tavo ended up with 5 shots. Connor had 3. And Kurashev had none, I believe. So, yeah, I'd like to see. Look, if it's not going well after a period or so in LA, I'm not for going a full 60 minutes. Like I'd like to see more in-game shuffling of lines and seeing how things develop versus, I've seen this now for 2 games. If it starts slow in LA on Saturday afternoon, I'm all for trying something different.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you got to lose?
Yeah, that's fair. And also I think it allows Luke Richardson to go to that option, given Bertuzzi the last couple games is starting to look like himself. Like he finally scored his first even strength goal the other night, but he had quite a few other chances as well. The one-timer that he just missed wide. There was another grade A opportunity that I can't remember when it happened in the game, but Bertuzzi is slowly starting to find his legs, it feels like. I also want to mention this. I kind of mentioned it in the pregame show and then also carried it on to the postgame show about Connor Bedard's faceoff numbers and like whether it's an actual concern or if it's something the Hawks can live with. And I was going through some of the NHL elite centers and seeing like what are their faceoff percentages and is it a big deal for their respective teams? And so Connor McDavid, his career faceoff percentage, 47.8. Not great, not bad. When he's on a line with Draisaitl takes those faceoffs because McDavid is not great in that department. And then the numbers continue to drop when I get to some of these other elite players. Nathan McKinnon, 45.9% career faceoff percentage. Evgeny Malkin, 3-time Stanley Cup champ, 2-time Hart, 44.9% at the faceoff circle. Jack Eichel, 44.7%. Matt Barzal, 42.3%. So these are NHL elite centermen. I think the one comparable that we can make to Connor Bedard is Jack Hughes, not stylistically, but Jack Hughes, his career faceoff numbers are 35.7. Wow. That is worse than Bedard's career. Wow. Bedard is 37.5. And at one point last year, New Jersey, I think it was during the second half of their season, New Jersey just they stopped giving Jack Hughes faceoffs. They're like, someone else is going to take these draws. You're going to continue to play the center position, but we're going to have one of the wingers on the line take them. Now, this year, ironically, they gave Jack Hughes more of that responsibility, so he's starting to take faceoffs again. And going into last night's game, as we were recording this, Bedard and Jack Hughes had each taken 100 faceoffs on the season. Bedard had won 30 of them, so 30%, and Jack Hughes had won 36. So I think the Hawks are just eventually going to have to live with the deficiency by Bedard. I'm not sure he's ever going to get to a level where he's respectable. And again, I think that if that's his big deficiency, I think you can live with it because once you have some of these younger players coming up, Oliver Moore, Frank Nazar, and maybe some of them get pushed to wing, you can have those guys step into the role. And similar to what we saw Patrick Sharp do in Chicago for a number of years when they didn't have that second line center, he would kind of slide in there, take some important faceoffs, and then get back to his natural position at wing. So it's not an ideal circumstance because when you go 0 for 10 in the faceoff circle combined as a line in Colorado, Kurashev was 0 for 2, Bedard was 0 for 8. I mean, that's tough to overcome. But the Hawks were able to get away with it the first 7 or 8 games when Nick Foligno was on that line because he was winning 60% of the draws.
Right, right.
So you're trying to find that right combination of a player that can play with Bedard, but also a guy that can win the faceoffs because he can't do it at a high level right now.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that. And, like last night, 44% it was Bedard at the faceoff circle, and then Kurashev was 33. So, he wasn't exactly someone that you could lean on. One thing I wanted to just touch on quickly about Bedard, it was brought up on 32 Thoughts last week. Elliot took the soundbite. I think it was one of the best soundbites I've heard from Connor, as far as he was asked, I think it was by Phil Thompson, about, frustrating and, do they feel like because they're in these games that, while the mantra this year is no moral victories, can you take some satisfaction that you're in all these games? And he's like, no, losing sucks, and Elliot went on kind of a tangent and talked about the frustration and where Connor is at in his young career. I look at it like this guy wants to win first and foremost. Okay. Everything in his life is geared towards putting himself in the best position to help his team win. That's his approach every single day. And is he frustrated with the losing? Yeah, I think anybody that's in that room is frustrated with the losing. Is he concerned about, I'm sure he's like, he realizes who's a better fit, who stylistically fits his game, I know you can see when he answers questions about Tavo and Kurashev, like he has an appreciation for what they bring to his game. But I don't think we're at a stage where, because he snaps a stick on the bench after a tough shift where he got a good look and didn't connect, I don't think we should then take it 6 steps further and be like, this guy is frustrated and where are things going? Do we have to worry about, the Bedard psyche long term? No, relax.
Right. Yeah.
But I would say this year is about development, right? And part of that is finding a semblance of a line for Bedard. And again, I'll point to the power play. Like, again, they didn't have many opportunities last night in San Jose. When you're struggling 5-on-5, it's nice to get a cookie every once in a while on the power play. And it's just lately it hasn't been there for this team. And if there's one area I'd love to see some growth, it's on the power play. And I think that would help bleed into 5-on-5 play.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a really good discussion that Kyle and Elliot had. And I think Elliot did a great job of putting it into perspective, not sounding the alarm bells that Bedard is unhappy or whatever. And I will say this too, like the Hawks, like Elliot reported this multiple times, that the Hawks made a run at Jake Gensel, like a strong run at Jake Gensel. The problem is the Hawks are still a few years away from any of the guys that are going to be part of their future. Yes. Levshinov, Korchinski, Nazar, Oliver Moore, all these players that are still in juniors or college, they're still a years away. It's not like these guys are here and it's like, oh boy, they're not developing the right way, or oh, they're not as good as we think they are. It's just like they're not even here in North America yet. And so that's part of the challenge. Like I think of when Patrick Kane and Jonathan Taves stepped into the NHL, they were walking into an infrastructure that already had Duncan Keith, Brent Seabrook, Patrick Sharp. A year later, they signed Marian Hossa. There was Brian Campbell. I mean, they had all these veterans and guys that were in the prime of their career or just entering the prime. So it was easy for them to step in and have immediate success. With Connor, it's almost like the Blackhawks won the lottery first. And that was like, which is the hardest part about the rebuild, is getting that player. But it's like, oh man, we need a few years to get the rest of the pieces in place, because there's no way for us to speed this up while not diminishing the potential long-term ramifications of this Blackhawks team. And so when they were talking about how they have to make sure that Chicago is a destination for some of these free agents, I mean, in a couple years, it absolutely will be when guys are like, oh, okay, Chicago's ready to roll now.
Right.
But now the next two or so years, it's going to be hard to sell those big tickets that have a Tampa Bay, all these contenders right now, to kind of pitch them that they can win and be there for the longer term. And I also want to point out the fact that, think about some of the elite NHL players in the game today and how long it took them to finally break through. I looked at Nathan McKinnon, missed the playoffs year one. He went to the playoffs year one, then missed the playoffs for the next 3 straight seasons. Year 4 was that historically bad year, and then they went to the playoffs year 5. He didn't win a Stanley Cup till 20. So there's a lot of years of McKinnon not having success in the postseason. Connor McDavid missed the playoffs 3 of his first 4 years. And then how about Tampa Bay? Steven Stamkos, he missed the playoffs 4 of his first 5 years. So it takes time. But all of those guys, well, maybe I'm not sure about McDavid just yet, but McKinnon, Stamkos, they've seen long-term success in Tampa and Colorado, and there were those 4 years at the beginning that were really hard, but it was worth the payout, knowing that it was going to lead to like 10 years of sustained success. And that's what the Hawks are trying to build. Can Kyle Davidson go out and start quick fixing all this? Sure. But that might derail the Hawks from wanting to be Stanley Cup contenders in like 10 years from now. Like they want to build a consistent winner over the court, just similar how they did with Kane and Taves. Like they want it to be a decade and a half or a decade, however long, not just, hey, we're impatient, let's speed this up now.
Let's be honest, the marquee free agent that's available, even if you overpay for him, if you are honestly looking at the Blackhawks right now or where Tampa Bay's at, or pick your team, you realize that the Blackhawks are a couple of years away from being seriously considered a contender for a Stanley Cup playoff run. And so in more times than not, you're going to opt for the team that you have a better chance to win it. And so, and we've seen the type of player that the Hawks are getting in the veteran free agency realm are mostly guys in their mid-30s who you're overpaying for. And so, but they don't have a lot of options out there. They can go chase rings, but many of these guys, Patty Maroon, Martinez, they have rings. And so, they come to Chicago to help the development of younger players. They know what the organization, how they treat their players. They know it's run first class, and they want that opportunity to play in front of 20,000 fans at the United Center. So, but like the Bertuzzi signing would have been the first one where you're like, okay, that has term and he's not in his mid to late 30s.
Right.
Like that's the first one that was like, oh, okay, that's a little off the path that we had seen Kyle on during the first 2 years of the rebuild. So, I think, Ben Pope wrote an article. I haven't had a chance to read it. I just kind of glanced at the headline, and it was something to the effect, Blackhawks fans understand this is going to take some time. I think he polls several different types of Blackhawk fans and kind of takes their temperature on where they're at with the rebuild. And, judging by the headline, patience is something that they understand. And by and large, is that the vibe you get from people? Or, the other thing that I think some people think, like, because in the NFL in 20 of the last 21 years, a team has gone from last to first. They tend to think like, okay, if it can happen here, it can happen in this sport as well. That doesn't translate.
Right, exactly. And I think there are some examples where rebuilds don't work out. Like you can look at Buffalo, you can look at the early years of Edmonton, you can look at Detroit, but I think all of those situations are very nuanced. Like Buffalo specifically, they didn't know where they were. They were like, oh, cool, like we'll luck into Jack Eichel, and then like their GM was like disappointed that they got the second overall pick because they wanted McDavid. So you're like, oh, cool. Like, what does that say to Jack Eichel, who you just drafted? And it's like, oh, we were mad we didn't win the lottery. And so it just seems like it was dysfunctional there. Edmonton kept winning number one overall picks, but they didn't know how to develop them. So they kept throwing them into the fire. And then we're like, oh, are we competing? Are we not? Detroit, like they've always fallen in the lottery. They haven't won that. They've never really jumped up or gotten that big piece. So that's why it's taking so long. With the Hawks, they have the hardest part of finding that foundational piece. The next step now for them is basically just, this is why Kyle Davidson went out and signed a bunch of guys to 2-year deals. Foligno, Mrazek, Dickinson. He's like, we need stopgaps to bridge the gap until our guys that are going to be here long-term are ready. And could Jason Dickinson be part of the future as a third line? Sure. But the intent of a lot of those deals these next 2 years are going to be placeholders for the guys that are actually going to be here long term. And so it's easy to lose patience when it's been a lot of losing in Chicago for a while, but the teardown needed to happen first. Then the buildup is almost the hard part, because it's a waiting game where you're waiting for these players to be ready and you don't want to rush them all at once. And so I understand the impatience of wanting the Blackhawks to turn a corner fast, but if you try to miss, if you skip a step, it's gonna be worse than if you took it a little bit slower than you should have.
Agreed. Well, let's see them finish this road trip strong. LA on Saturday, Anaheim on Sunday, 2 winnable games, and a great 2:30 pregame show on Saturday, which we're very happy about. That is going to do it for the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast for CHSM. We're brought to you by Toyota. Let's go places. For Charlie, I'm Pat. Thanks for listening and watching. We'll catch you next time.